Aloha, and welcome back to another episode of the Ohana Packers Edition podcast, the podcast where two dudes from halfway around the world talk everything green and gold. Tonight, we're joined by CheezeTalk pod, Brian. Brian, thanks for joining us today as we go into what should be the last of our directionless episodes as we search for topics to talk about the Packers while we patiently wait for games to be played again. Brian, thank you for joining Joe and I tonight. How you doing?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yep. Great. I know that we've all got stuff going on. Joe is dealing with the two of us. Brian's got dogs. I've got barely staying awake at this point, but we're going to motor through this one like the professionals that we are.
Five kids, too.
And as the absolute professionals, we're putting on a top 5 draft of things we'd like to see from the Packers this preseason. The super professional journalistic integrity portion of this is we do not have the topics picked out or written down anywhere. The draft order is, will you get to pick your topics before you have to come up with others because someone else has picked your topic? And we're going to go snake order. So we'll start with Brian because Brian's, even though he is with OPE Network, he is our guest, quote unquote, for today's pod. And then it will go to Joe and then to me. And then I will go first in the second round, then Joe, and then Brian, and so forth until we get through 5 rounds of this. So no real rules. As we kind of discussed before the show, we're just going to try and keep it preseason centric, but obviously that conversation may organically lead to some regular season talk, but as much as we can, we will try and keep this preseason oriented. But Brian, fire off whatever topic comes to mind as to what you're looking for as the most important thing you're wanting to see out of the Packers this preseason run.
I want to see the speed of the defense, stopping the run, speed of the defense as they try to fix that run disaster we had last year, the run defense. I think switching to the 4-3 is good. I just want to see a fast defense just flying around, making the right plays. I think we hit that with who we drafted.
I think that's what everybody wants to look at is just because if I was first, I would probably be the first one on, my number 1 draft pick is just how that defense is going, how fast it's going to be, the kind of pressures that they're going to do, the kind of run stopping. So yeah, that's got to be the obvious number 1 pick out of it all.
And it's a good one, Brian, because stop me if you've heard this before. This Packers defense is faster than anyone you've seen before. I feel like we've heard that every friggin' year since the Super Bowl, and we've heard it, and then you have moments where, like, Julius Peppers, absolute legend of the game, but his first game as a Packer, he's standing what looks like with cement on his feet as Percy Harvin goes running by him on an end around, and it's like, oh, nobody's moving. Great kind of thing. And so, like, yeah, like to kind of expand, it's like the physical speed of the defense, but also kind of like Brian alluded to, this shift from this 3-4 front that I always preferred the 3-4, but if your defensive coordinator is not going to really utilize the 3-4 for what it's supposed to be intended to do, you might as well dumb it down and go to a 4-3 and just be like, these are our 11 guys, and this is what we're going to do kind of thing. So it seems like a lot of the system is in place to operate that way. And yeah, Brian, that's a great first pick to kick us off with.
Well, and then that, too, it gives us a better chance of not seeing Preston Smith covering a wide receiver.
Yeah, and to clarify that, that's not on Preston at all. That is purely at the feet of Joe Barry, that he never had the imagination to switch that call up where it's like everyone asks, how does that always happen? How does that always happen? It's like, okay, the whole premise is the 3-4. You've got 3 down linemen who are rushing, and then you have 4 linebackers. One of them's coming, and Barry's like, well, I'm not changing which one. It's always going to be Rashawn. And it's like, all right, Preston, go do something.
You're better at putting, if you're going to do that, you're better at putting a safety covering that receiver and putting Preston Smith at safety.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Maybe as he's bailing out of there, he might, just as he's trying to sprint, he might get in the way of something. So
the thing that I always said about Joe Barry was that he could coach a position group, but he couldn't develop a defensive scheme because he had no ability to adjust on the fly. He could install a scheme, but it had to be somebody else's scheme. He could never do it on his own. He could go right out of the playbook. Okay, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do that. But when he was getting his ass kicked on the field, he couldn't adjust to it, and that's where you would get the things like Preston on Devontae, or in the red zone you've only got 3 down linemen and shit like that, or I know Mike's boy is Darnell Savage. You have a regression in Darnell Savage from the Petten years to that year because he's putting him out of place. Well, you can't. He's got to be able to adjust in the game, and he never could adjust in the game. Now, he could coach the hell out of players. There's no doubt about it because he was one of the best linebacking coaches you could ever have. He just couldn't create a scheme. With Hafley, though, I have to say this is the first time in a long, long time that I remember the defense being as excited as they were about playing in a scheme. I have to say this even goes back to when Capers first came in.
Yeah,
that the players have really bought into the system. They're really excited. Hafley is taking advice, or not advice, but he's taking suggestion from players, because I think it was Rashawn said something about Hafley was talking about how Rashawn came in and said something about we need to really fire up and we need to get in this, and from that moment, Hafley was like, yeah, go for it, and now they've been basically off the rocker on things and just have went like their hair is on fire. So this is the first time in a long time I've been excited about the defense. And I think this is the first time in a long time that I think the players are excited for their defense.
Yeah. As a whole unit kind of thing. Because before, like you've had individuals who played for certain ones of these coordinators who are like, oh no, it's a good system. Like, I'm going to show these guys why it's great. And the other half of the defense is like, all right, like, we'll see how it goes. Like both of you pointed to, this is the first time in a while, probably since that 2010 season, where all the guys in that defensive meeting room are like, we're gonna do some shit on the field this season. So,
well, that too, and you look at, look at how outspoken in a good way Jair was last year. And then if we get a healthy Stokes back, and then you get Xavier McKinney, a captain from the defense in New York, and then you draft Javon Bullard, brings even more swag to that defense. Yeah, this is gonna be one scary defense.
I think this is gonna be a year of like narrative rehab for a lot of, like, for a Jair, for guys who they were labeled as potentially toxic, or like, you shouldn't, no matter what, you shouldn't talk about your defensive coordinator, like all that kind of crap. But it's like, if you really baked it down to its core, it's like none of them said anything that was wrong, or like, they didn't say it in a totally inflammatory way. You just don't like who the messenger is, kind of thing. Like, and
well, they don't want things going out external. They want to keep everything internal. They don't want the media hearing that there's dysfunction in the defensive room. So and you gotta feel that. And don't get me wrong, I love Matt LaFleur. He's a hell of a coach, but this was his first actual hire for a coordinator position. I mean, he pretty much kept a lot of the same guys that came over with the McCarthy era. And the Joe Barry signing was his first major signing as a coordinator. And you got to think he wasn't going to admit there was a mistake until he had to admit there was a mistake.
Yeah.
And when you've got players walking out there saying, hey, this is, look at Devondre Campbell. Devondre was as outspoken as he could get there towards the end of his time in Green Bay. Jair was doing some weird ass shit. Not like weird ass shit in a bad way, but when it came to the defense and all that stuff. And I strongly believe that's why Jerry Gray was let loose before Joe Barry was, because if everybody remembers right, there was a rumor going around that Jerry Gray was pretty much undermining Joe Barry's position, because the secondary was going to Jerry for their assignments more than they were going to Barry.
Yep.
And you can't have that. You've got a hierarchy. You've got to answer to the coordinator. Well, when the coordinator doesn't know what the hell he's doing, you got to go somewhere. So, and we've talked about that for over a year now, didn't we, Mike? About how dysfunctional Joe Barry's shit was.
Yep. So
yeah, I've been saying it since like the last few years at Rodgers in Green Bay too. I mean, it's kind of off topic, but I felt like players are walking on eggshells around Rodgers, especially like people on offense, because it's like, if I don't get the ball and show production, I'm not going to get paid. So I have to kiss Aaron's ass to try to get the ball, and then you got LaFleur as the head coach siding with Rodgers because he doesn't want to have that conflict behind closed doors. And I think I think LaFleur can finally run the offense the way he wanted to run it. Since I think this is why they brought him in, is to run this offense that we saw last year and we're going to see this year.
I agree, but I disagree, because I think LaFleur would tend, yes, he would follow Rodgers' lead for a lot of it, but I think that's also why you saw a lot of butting of heads, because LaFleur would say, no, we got to do it this way. You need to do this. Yeah. You need to do that. And, but you would still have, okay, yeah, I get you, Aaron, whatever, go do what you're going to do. And that's why you heard a lot of the media questioning things like, okay, going into, what was it? Was it the first year LaFleur was in there? And, well, how are you going to let Rodgers run it at the line still, or is he got to answer to you for everything? That's why you're getting those kind of questions, because LaFleur was kind of, but to agree with you an extent, you could also tell that, and I said this for a little bit too. I remember going up to training camp when LaFleur was hired. And I remember, because I was up there when the Texans came in for joint practices. And I remember going back to my grandpa and saying, I think this is the closest we're going to get to a Vince Lombardi-style coach in Green Bay. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, this guy had no problems going out there and mixing it up with the players, going out there and butting heads with players. Because I remember when Lonnie, what was his name,
Johnson.
Mike? Lonnie Johnson hit Jay Sternberger and injured Sternberger. LaFleur was right in the middle of the scrum. It's like, this guy is nuts. This isn't the coach we've seen in a long time. But then you saw him get passive after a while. And now we're seeing the resurgence. And now we're way off topic. So let's...
Well, that's up to you.
That's why we don't allow other people onto the show, damn it.
The two of us are aimless already, so we're just adding more fuel on the fire. Joe, second pick, go.
I've said this for a while, and I said this, I think it was last week with Matt Ramage on the show. My focus, and this isn't normally my focus because we've been so, if you want to use spoiled over the years with it, my focus is going to be the offensive line. There's so many questions right now with what's going on. We think, and this is my theory on how it's going to play out, we think it's going to be Rashid, Elton, Myers, Morgan, Tom. That's how we think it's probably going to roll out. But the best we can do is say we think, because they've been rotating so many different guys on the offensive line. They've put Elton at center. They've put Morgan at both tackle positions. They've brought in Caleb Jones, or didn't bring him in, but they've slotted him in over there. They've slotted
Telford.
Was it Telford? I was going to say Tenuta because they were really high on Tenuta, but it's Telford. But they both start with T, so it is what it is.
And then Tom hasn't been fully healthy yet either, so that's what's also making it a little murky.
But didn't LaFleur say after last night or say this morning that they expect Zach Tom to start doing some 11-on-11s this coming week?
Yeah.
So he's going to be on his way back. But then you have what was said, was it last offseason or this offseason, that, the Packers view Zach Tom as an all-pro Hall of Fame center. So does that mean he's going to be taking snaps at center? There's just all these questions going into it. There's the issue that we can rehash with the Jordan Morgan pick in the first round this year. The whole reason why I wasn't high on it, Mike was iffy on it too. The question is, where the hell does he play? And that's not a good question to be asking about your first round pick, is where the hell does he play? Well, his arms are too short for tackle, so that means he's a guard. Well, not necessarily. He could play center if you wanted him to, so he's a center. No, he's probably going to be a tackle. Well, that's not something you need for a first round pick. So my big thing is watching the offensive line being rolled out for the preseason games. Obviously not so much for the third one, because that's probably going to be primarily second, third, fourth, fifth string guys trying to make, catch the last roster spots. But at least the second preseason game will give us a decent look at what the starting lineup should be.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch how that shakes out. I do think they are going to it is going to shake out to the Walker, Elton, Myers, I guess Morgan, based on how the Ryan Morgan rotation is going right now, and Tom. But like you said, Joe, we just haven't seen it yet, for a variety of different reasons, shuffling Morgan around, Tom working his way back from a pec tear, and just, Myers needed some personal days off and stuff. So, you've had different guys shuffling in and out of that starting five group for a variety of different, reasons. So we just haven't seen that unit yet. And frankly, it falls under the category of, I don't care what happens until the first preseason game, because it doesn't matter until you see that unit go out and play together against a, not practice opponent. Kind of, you got to see a live rep out of that group before you really take any sort of shuffling to heart on that. So yeah, no, but until we see that music, until the music goes off on that game of musical chairs and we see who's got a seat and who's left standing at the end of it, we're not going to know. And realistically, especially with how little starters play in the preseason, we may not really know until, week one in Brazil. So,
I still think that week 2 in the preseason we'll get an idea of what their plan is, just because that's when you think most of the starters will get a chunk of playing time. Week 1 is usually they only get like a quarter or maybe 10 minutes or the first drive or whatever. Then week 2 is usually when they do, the half. And then week 3 is when none of them play. And that's how normal procedures go, but we haven't been normal in a long ass time, so who knows what's going to happen.
Yep. Okay, so my first of 2 picks is going to be Jordan Love's deep ball accuracy. Again, this is one of those weird ones where it's like we don't know how much of that we're going to see in preseason, but for what we've seen so far in training camp and what we're hearing is he's already taken another step in his deep ball shot making. And, we saw a turn probably from about that Lions Thanksgiving game, where before it was kind of like, oh man, it's short, it's wide. Everything was short because it was the whole get the ball up in the stratosphere. That's what she said. Can we stay on topic here, sir? But
I'm sorry.
It was right there. That was a softball of softballs.
I could have said something else, but I'm not going to be that mean.
But so, it looked like Love took a more grip it and rip it approach to the second half of the season on his deep ball. We saw, it still wasn't all there, but at least plays were being made. It wasn't just like, oh man, that guy's open and it's just, missed opportunity kind of thing. It was more the, okay, we're at least gaining 30 yards, but there was a chance for another 15 or more kind of thing. But it sounds like, from what we saw on Saturday's family night and just what we're seeing in a lot of the, like I said, practice highlight clips are, they're helpful, but there's also, a very big grain of salt to be taken with it. But I do think Love has shown a level of accuracy, anticipation on his deep throws that he didn't have, at this point last year. And like I said, LaFleur and Love have been pretty mum on how much Love is going to play during the preseason. But, I'm sure if he gets, a drive, a quarter, whatever, we're going to see a deep shot or two in whatever time he gets on the field. So hoping to see a little bit better, a little bit more proficiency than we saw in last preseason, and kind of a level of ability that shows a progression from where he was to end the season. So that's the first one that I'm looking for. And then the second one I'm looking for is to see who out of this receiver room takes a step from their game last season. And the elephant in the room is Christian Watson staying on the field. And, I made the joke after that highlight throw that Love had in Family Night where he throws the absolute perfect ball to the corner of the end zone over Jair's coverage. And I just retweeted it and I said, okay, wrap Watson up, put him in bubble wrap, and let's just get him to South America for week 1 already. I do think...
Well, and I want to say something about that, because that's one of the things that I seen, or I was able to watch. Jair didn't get beat. I'm seeing a lot of people say that Watson beat Jair. He didn't get beat. That was as great as coverage as you could have. It was just an amazing placement by Jordan Love.
Yeah.
And it was an even better catch by Christian Watson.
Yeah.
There's no beat there. There's no better coverage than you could have. The only way Jair could have made a play on there is if he would have been as probably a couple inches taller. Then he might have been able to make a better play on it. But there was no better way that he could have played that.
But I mean, then again, if you have like I've seen videos of Dubs in training camp getting behind Jair, if that's the case, then we have really good receivers.
Yeah,
I mean, you can play the best coverage possible, but if you have, say, Watson, who I think can burn any defense over the top if he's healthy with his speed, it just shows how good our receivers are. I mean, you can't knock Jair for being a good cornerback. I mean, especially when he's getting beat. If he is getting beat by, say, Dubs and Watson, two of the best in the game. I mean, it's
yeah. And
I will agree this is probably a great wide receiver core. I saw that bad take from a couple of different accounts yesterday, and it's like, no, he didn't get beat. He was
that's the adage of great offense beats great defense every day personified.
Yeah.
And to Brian's point, I know a couple of the plays were in the 11 on 11, but the quarterback's not completely live. So, edge rushers are trying, but they're not trying kind of thing and stuff. And then in the one-on-ones, that is a drill that is geared to the offensive player, because unless the coaching staff is like, all right, you have until this horn goes off, or you have until some timer goes off, the defense is out there covering like the old Fran Tarkenton days where he runs around the width of the field 3 times and then just throws the ball to someone who's he's open, but he's uncovered because he's made like a fifth adjustment on his route kind of thing. So, but still great to see the production from Dobbs. And yeah, it's like, we've spent the last half of the 23-24 season wondering who's going to become that quote unquote wide receiver 1 out of this room. Is it a matter of Watson being healthy? Is it Wicks taking a step as, an ascending young player? Is it Dobbs realizing the talent that he has? Is it Jaden Reed being, just so explosive in the slot that he just forces defenses to cover him a different way? So you add all of that up, and I raise that question not so much as to say I want to pick my favorite kid kind of thing. It's more just I do think that those guys, that receiver room is turning it into a competition to see who's going to be the best man standing. And the irony of it all is I think that honestly, it behooves the Packers that they don't necessarily have a single go-to guy. I think it helps that they have a room of guys that, that is a Swiss Army knife room where it's like, okay, we have 5 guys that Jordan trusts in almost any situation, and we're just going to look at who you got at your quarterback room, and we're going to just roll the best matchup options out there. And so, obviously, you want to have a guy that you're like, and I kind of do think it's Dobbs, where it's like, if the thing breaks down, this is who Love is looking for. And
that's who it seems like it's been throughout the first week and a half of training camp. Is Dobbs is his safety net.
So, there's times like that where you want to see it, but also if all these guys, and I know that's very unlikely. If it does happen, the Packers are winning the Super Bowl. Like, I don't think that's even hyperbolic. If the top 5 wide receivers, if Watson stays healthy and takes a step, Dobbs takes a step, Reed stays healthy and takes a step, Wicks takes a step, and then screw it, you can pick who you want the 5th one to be, Melton, just for shits and giggles of having another deep threat on the field. If all 5 of those guys take a step forward, this offense goes from very good to stupid uncoverable. So yeah, that's my first pick of the second round there.
Well, if you go back to the Rodgers teams that were great, they didn't have a traditional number 1 receiver. They just had a room of solid guys that weren't, how do you want to put it? Because they were great receivers, but jack of all trades, master of none. They weren't great at one certain thing, but they were good at everything. Whether that's route running, getting open, separation, receiving, that's how they were. And you think about it, the best receiving core they had to have been Jennings, Jones, Jordy, Cobb,
and an old
one
driver.
Yeah, Driver. I can't believe I couldn't remember Driver off the top of my head.
Their elite skill was that they didn't have a glaring hole in their game. That's right. That's the thing, is like,
well,
and yeah.
With that too, you have you have those 4 receivers on the field, and go back to Joe's point with like the receivers he mentioned that Rodgers had, and then we have Tucker Kraft and Musgrave. Who's going to cover them?
Yeah.
So I mean, right there, then you have. I was reading Josh Jacobs' stats, and he doesn't have any receiving touchdowns at all in his career in the NFL. Then you get him out, and all of a sudden, peekaboo, he's out in the flat, wide open, catches the ball, he's gone. So I mean, it's going to be a crazy, crazy sick offense that we're going to see, I think, this year. But it just, I'm excited.
We're all, what we're basically saying is we are lighting the player health prayer circle, and we are going to keep that flame lit longer than the Olympic flame is going to be lit for the rest of 2024.
and see, to piggyback off Mike's pick, that's probably going to be the hardest cut at the end of the preseason, is the cuts going on in the wide receiver room, because you've got the obvious ones that are going to stick around, like Watson, Dobbs, Reed. Then you start getting question marks. And I know this is going to be controversial, but question marks in Wicks, Melton, Heath, Grant DeBose has been making plays in his moments in training camp. And I say controversial because everybody thinks Wicks is a guarantee. But with everybody else in the room, after your top 3, nobody's a guarantee. Unless they do something wild like trade Watson or trade Dobbs or something, nobody outside those 3 are guaranteed, because you've got so many other bodies in that room that are going to need playing time, and there's no way the Packers are going to be able to carry 8 wide receivers on the friggin' 53-man roster. And they're not going to be able to hold over on the practice squad, because they're going to get picked up at the end. I know we say this every year, that we expect somebody to claim such and such and such, but this is the year that I honestly believe it can happen, because in his limited time when he was put in to play, Melton looked terrific. He got a 100-yard game against Minnesota. Heath was looking tremendous. The only one that I don't think will get picked up unless he absolutely blows away preseason is DeBose, and that's because there's nothing on tape for him to be able to pick him up unless somebody really believes in his talent, which I'm not saying he's not talented. I'm just saying there's nothing to back it up in the professional level. Wicks is kind of the same thing. I think there was a tweet stating that he was during family night practice last night, he was only targeted 6 times. So, obviously Dobbs and Watson are going to get the most targets out of it, but Wicks was only targeted 6 times for somebody who is like the second coming of Devontae Adams,
Was that on purpose though?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Why show your whole playbook if you don't have to?
And then
you're not.
I'm not sure your playbook, but we know what he did last year. He can only way up or only way to get better is
but
he can only get better from last year. So we know what he can do. We
have an idea of what he can do because of limited snaps last year because he was also dealing with injury for a lot of times.
Right.
But if you go with what you just said, then you would think they wouldn't want to target Watson and Dobbs as much because...
Well, that's the obvious. I don't know. I think Wicks makes the roster. I do.
Well, I'm not saying he doesn't make the roster. I'm just saying the only 3 guaranteed right now are the top 3. Right. Because there's going to be a lot of stuff towards the end of it that a lot of hard decisions are going to have to be made. And I'm not saying Wicks isn't going to make the team. I'm just saying that I don't think he's fully guaranteed a roster spot.
Yeah.
Who knows? It could be one of those things where, okay, we've got all these guys. Wicks is expendable, so we're going to trade him for a 6th-round pick in the 2027 draft. That's
what I was saying in one of my podcasts. I forgot who I had on, but they're like, "Well, what's going to happen when there's all time for a contract? Leverage,
right?
That's the problem that they're going to run into is in 2 years they got to make decisions on Dobbs and Watson, and then the year after that they got to make decisions on the rest of the guys. So yeah, but I do think we're a year out. But Joe's right, nothing is off the table. But
right.
The other side of it is I do wonder if these new kickoff rules, which I'm not sure if I'll understand the full ramifications of it until we're like a season and a half through these new rule changes. I do wonder how much those change how they shape the roster because you're like, it's before it was like, oh, you need guys who will tackle on special teams. Now with the new kickoff rules, it's kind of like, do you need more guys who can catch the ball and run with it kind of thing? So and you're not going to put Watson on kick returns at this point of his career. So it's like, do you keep a 7th wide receiver? Does keeping a 7th wide receiver become more acceptable? How before it was like, oh, like, what are you going to do with a 7th wide receiver? That's a totally unnecessary, unuseful position, 53-man roster spot, where now it's like, maybe these new special teams rules are like, maybe that guy does become important. So who's to say? There's a lot of that's kind of, like I said, where it gets into a little bit of the regular season side of it, but there's a lot of different ways to slice this thing up. But so, Joe, that was your pick of what you're looking forward to, kind of more eyeing the end of training camp, or
more, I guess, more eyeing what the wide receiver room kind of folds out. Because, like I said, there's so many question marks with it that, like I said, DeBose has even been showing off in camp.
Yeah.
Well, obviously it's just camp, but you never know what can happen. And that was one of the things said about him when he was drafted was he came from a small school. He had tons of talent, but he was very raw. So as he's starting to put it together to make the right, and then obviously I'm a big Heath mark. So, so I guess mine is more the end of the depth chart for the wide receivers. Because, like I said, we know who the 3 top guys are going to be.
Yeah. All right, Brian, you've got picks. You've got your second and then the first pick of the third round. So lay it on us. What you got?
I'm curious to see how it plays out. Who's going to be running back too, and who's going to be our kicker. Marshawn Lloyd, just seeing his college highlights, being a fresh rookie in the NFL, and seeing what he did in college and his speed and his aggression and his size, it's kind of like having like a second AJ Dillon, you know.
I would say more of a little bit bulkier Aaron Jones because they're about built the same. It just Marshawn.
My point is like a wrecking ball, you know.
Yeah.
As far as like busting through the line and laying a hit on somebody, you're trying to avoid a hit. You're out there looking to make a hit on somebody, you know.
Yeah.
I think they brought back AJ Dillon for his leadership in the locker room. I mean, he knows the playbook. I mean, I think he'll get playing time, I think, but I think that Marshawn Lloyd will most likely take over as RB2. And then as far as the kicking, I don't want to give up on Carlson because you can go back and look at he had a better kicking percentage his rookie year versus Mason Crosby did his rookie year in Green Bay. But Crosby did attempt more field goals. But, I mean, I can remember back people wanted to throw the towel in on Mason Crosby. And he was pretty much a lifelong Packer, a leading scorer in team history, correct? I mean,
right.
Why give up on a kid that's a rookie, you know? So I'm just curious to see, you know, the competition at kicker because I know they brought in Greg Joseph, who was doing decent. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens in those two parts of the team.
We kind of talked about it last week with Ramage that nobody's really run away with the competition yet. Matter of fact, they had another guy in that they were trying out today. I can't think of his name, but he played in the UFL this past whatever UFL season and shit like that. So they're still trying out guys even. But and I agree they can't just give up on Carlson right away because not that it's a great example because of the team he was on, but you take a look at Daniel Carlson, shit the bed with the Vikings, and then went on to be one of the best kickers in the NFL with the Raiders. So you can't just say, it was what, because you also got to remember Anders was still getting used to kicking after tearing his ACL. You know, I think what was it, Mike? You know it a little bit better than I do. Was it his senior year at college? He was kicking with a brace. So his rookie year, he was kicking out without the brace. So he was trying to readjust. So, you know, that is one thing that can make a ton of difference when you get used to one way and then you've got to go back doing it to the other way. There's a bit of adjustment there. So,
right.
Yeah, it'll be again. That's what's going to be a thing to keep an eye on in the preseason is just how that battle goes down.
Yeah, I agree. And then just to kind of touch lightly on Brian's point about the running backs, I do think that LaFleur and Gutekunst are hoping that Lloyd can pick up the running back 2 slack as quickly as possible. You know, that's always what you kind of hope for is that your young players or, you know, even Wilson, for example, can kind of pick up the slack there. But I do think Dillon is there as like an insurance policy, you know, both for Jake, because Jacobs has kind of been a little bit injury-ish the last couple of seasons, not really missing time, but we've seen his efficiency go down a little bit the last couple of years because he's had some nagging hamstring and stuff. And then also to be a guy that's like, they trust Dillon in pass protection. They trust him enough in the pass, even though he's not explosive, they trust him to be in the right-ish spots in the pass game. And they trust him to run hard behind this O-line. So it's like, you can count on him. You know, he's not special, but you count on him to make the right plays. And you're like, if he has to play, fine. Like, we're fine with AJ Dillon picking up running back 2 snaps. But you're hoping that Wilson or Lloyd can make it a competition, like a true, like possibly taking snaps away. But also, it's a lot to ask for a rookie running back to pick up a whole offensive playbook, pick up all the pass protection schemes, and just gain the trust of everyone on offense. So it's a good bet hedge, but it is something that's going to be really interesting to keep an eye on going through the preseason.
I wonder, though, depending on how the other battles play out and what they keep on the roster at the different positions, I wonder if they could keep 4 running backs and use AJ as the fullback / running back.
Yep. Especially possible because, sorry, your long lost cousin got cut, Joe.
Yeah, I know.
And they do not have like a fullback on roster. So it's kind of like, do they, it kind of looked like they were having Tucker and Ben Sims play fullback last season. And so if your tight ends are more fungible as your fullback, then that's a roster spot that doesn't get used, and that fullback roster spot goes to another running back. So I do think it's definitely
not
possible.
Tyler Davis. As long as it's not Tyler Davis.
That 84 needs to go to a receiver. It's blasphemy that a Green Bay Packer not wide receiver is wearing 84. That's a atrocity against nature. But all right, Joe, what's your third pick for what you're looking for this preseason?
I'm going to take it before anybody else does, and I'm going to have to say the safety room, because we know the one starter, and that's going to be McKinney. Who knows what the other route is that they're going to go? I know they've been saying that they've kind of rotated him so far in training camp. So Anthony Johnson Jr. has been starting him, one day, and then Evan Williams is the next day, and around in a circle just to see who better fits with who. It pains me to say as a loyal Hawkeye fan that I'm kind of rooting for Anthony Johnson Jr. just because I think he has the ability to do it. And I know a lot of the talking heads were kind of surprised that he lasted as long as he did in the draft last year. And a lot of people assumed it was because he only played 1 year at safety. So if he can pick it up that quick, I'm excited to see what he can do going forward.
Yeah.
But I'm also excited to see what these rookies can do. Bullard, another Georgia Bulldog, he's been outstanding so far. Evan Williams has been talked about great. I think Oladipo is still out due to injuries.
I think he just came back at the end of last week. So, basically, for all intents and purposes, he's still out kind of thing.
Yeah. So, they've got all these guys that they just drafted in this past draft. Plus, they've got the guys from last year, Anthony Johnson Jr., Benny Sapp. I don't expect much out of Benny Sapp other than I really kind of like him. I think he's got the pedigree to him, and no, it doesn't have to do anything with him being a UNI Panther. Because he was a Minnesota Gopher before that, so fuck the Gophers. But what hurts him also is I think he's a little bit older he was a little bit older coming out last year, so I don't expect him to be great or anything, and he'll mainly be a special teams person. But this safety room, again, like I said, with the wide receiver room, there's so much depth right now that this is like a complete 180 compared to what we're used to with the safety room. Before we were wondering which UDFA was going to be the fill-in spot because there was nobody else that could do it. And I know a lot of people are saying, oh, well, this is the best we've had since Nick Collins. Well, yeah, but you guys forget about Morgan Burnett. And you forget about, the
Atari Bigby.
And to be fair about with Bigby is he was never a cover guy. He was just a hitter. Yep. So, I mean, that's something we've been lacking for a while, is somebody who's not afraid to make a hit on somebody. And it's finally good that we're seeing guys, the Packers finally invest into those groups.
Yeah. This safety room, I do think, unless someone really runs away with that second safety spot, I do think it's going to be a little bit like what the wide receiver room is, where you got McKinney, who's far and away your safety one. You pay him all that money to be that. And then you've got, like you said, you've got Johnson Jr., you've got Evan Williams, Bullard, Oladapo when he is healthy. And so amongst those four, you've got four guys who are just totally different players amongst, they have a little bit of overlap amongst each other, but it really allows you to be more matchup centric. And I do trust Hafley to be that kind of guy. There's a joke amongst coaching circles where it's like, you can tell what position group a coordinator coached by how their defense is run. And Hafley being a secondary guy by nature, I do think that is very good for this defense moving forward, because the big thing for him is if you can get your coverage in order, the front seven of your defense will, I don't want to say it falls into place, automatically, but I do think that a good secondary covers up a lot of, potential holes on the front end. And I know that between the three of us, we'll go over that front seven in vigor, but I do think that I'm excited to see those, especially the four young players. I don't expect McKinney to play much in the preseason, but I'm excited to see what those four younger guys get to do in the preseason action. And if we see any sort of a pecking order take shape, or if it really just does look like one guy starts one game, one guy starts another game, and one guy starts the third game. And it's kind of like, okay, like they didn't really rotate him. And is it just matchup based kind of thing? So that'll be interesting to follow in the preseason. So
could you see them playing some of those linebackers? Say you have, McKinney and you have Javon Bullard at safety, and you swap out like a linebacker with a safety for plays to like blitz.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, they're going to be utilizing that left and right.
Oh yeah, definitely.
You're not going to draft four safeties to play one. You're going to be having on the field at the same time in multiple schemes,
and that's the thing is, like, we talk about shifting from our 3-4 to our 4-3. The fact of the matter is that I don't expect us to play more than about 20% of the season in base anyway. The league just has totally moved away from base defense because offenses are playing so many 3 and multiple wide receiver sets. So you're going to spend most of the time in sub package. And then on top of that, we don't know what the linebacker room is. They're high on Edge Cooper, I'm trusting that Quay is going to take a leap, but realistically, you struggled to find 2 off-ball linebackers in the 3-4 scheme, and now you have a third one that you have to fill. And I wonder how much of that Hafley is going to try and bondo and duct tape over for this season as the rookies get in, Quay gets acclimated to his scheme, and how much he tries to bridge that gap with just playing more sub-package. So it'll be interesting to see going into the season.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, and I know I'm wrong a lot, so it won't hurt my feelings if you do correct me. But isn't Hafley's system, even though they call it a 4-3, doesn't he run more of a 4-2-5?
It really is. It is, yeah. So it's 4-3 in quote-unquote base, like against big personnel, but he really does run a nickel. It's a 3-safety nickel system, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that, but on top of that, I see Gutekunst doing to the safety room that he did with a lot of the other ones that had big question marks, and just draft a bunch of them and throw it against the wall and see what the hell sticks over there. And, if this guy doesn't work out, okay, we'll call it a fail. But at least one of the 4 guys opposite McKinney has to stick. You've got to believe that. And with this, right, that's the big one, everybody. But on top of that, you got to remember that the safety room was so bare going into this season. They only had one guy that was listed at safety that played time at safety from last year left on the roster, and that was Anthony Johnson Jr. So they had to throw a bunch of stuff at that position to get him going. So that's the signing of McKinney. That's the drafting of all the guys that they drafted. So, yeah, that's my go.
Yeah. So I'll stay, and don't forget the man, the myth, the international man of mystery, Zane Anderson, is still on the roster and is actually appearing in preseason plays clips. So I always have to get Zane Anderson jokes off. But
to be honest, I didn't even realize he was still on the roster. I completely blanked it out of my mind.
And that's not like wasn't he in the group One Direction?
Yes.
That's a total dad joke because you're the only one that can know it because of your kids.
Yes.
I'm going to stick kind of in the same area of the field, and it's going to be, mine is who looks best in that cornerback 2 role. Similar situation to the safety. I don't expect Jair to play much, if at all, in the preseason. He has nothing to prove. I know new defensive coordinator, maybe the number one defense get some run together just to, grease the wheels and get some time on field together and against an actual opponent. But I'm really curious to see, I'm very happy that Stokes has been able to just, I know he's getting beat here and there in practice and stuff, but more than anything, I'm just glad that he's been out there from day one of training camp and he hasn't missed days since that. He's just been able to stay on the field, and that's a huge step in the right direction for him. And most of the returns are promising. Yes, he's gotten beat here and there. I know that Dobbs got behind him on family night.
A lot of rust.
And that's a route that Stokes, even at 100% health, was never going to cover. It was a double move post corner route. And that's a route that Stokes was never built to cover very well, especially against a receiver like Dobbs. But I'm just so happy for him that he's been able to stay on the field and healthy. And overall, it sounds like he's in position and, he's not just getting toasted every time. It's just that, guys are, like you said, Joe, they don't have rust to knock off like he does. And then the other one, of course, he's hurt right now, but Carrington Valentine, who closed last season so well, but, they have high expectations for him, and seeing, if he can not just maintain that level, but really expand his game off of what he did at the end of last season, because he's the guy that you're looking at that would be that, not that he's going to be Charles Woodson. And I know that, you've got multiple guys on this roster like we've idolized and watched a lot of Charles Woodson, but out of the guys in the starting unit, we know that Ja doesn't like to play a slot, but Carrington is the guy that you're like, he's got the build and the athleticism to start on the outside and move inside in the sub package as you bring another, you bring Stokes on the field to play on the perimeter. So, do they shuffle it that way? Does Kalen King actually make the roster? How long does Nixon hold the young guys off to be the top slot defender? Does he start losing reps to a safety? There's a lot of different angles that, I'm kind of curious to see, does Nixon, is he losing reps to the young guys, or are they actually putting him on offense more? Like, you've heard LaFleur, he's kind of like talking out of both sides of his mouth on that side of it. But even Nixon has kind of said, like, we've had conversations and stuff. So just curious to see how that, that quarterback situation shakes out. It's a similar to the safety room. They didn't attack it the same way that they did the safety room, but I do feel like they have, just by Ja being healthy this season, Stokes also getting and staying healthy this season, they just have better options on the board than last year, where they really did just scrape the absolute bottom of the barrel in terms of, like, we forget having good corners. We have to field corners on this roster because everyone,
to be fair, the guys that they brought in were doing amazing jobs. I mean, Corey Ballantyne earned a second contract because of the play that he was doing last year. So, yeah.
And then to dovetail that in, again, kind of sticking with new scheme, how is this going to look? This D-line, and that encompasses not just Kenny, new contract Clark, but the ends, what are now defensive ends again. I know that Halfley stands his guys up and lets them do some kind of funky things, but for all intents and purposes, this is a 4-man D-line, and we're getting back to each one of those guys. You've got a gap, you've got a gap, you've got a gap, you've got a gap. Go win attack upfield and get to the play kind of thing. And we've heard all different kind of things. We obviously it's against not the best guys that are on the offensive side of the ball, but we've heard that Rashawn has basically been unblockable all training camp. Lucas looks to have turned a corner and is taking his game to another level. Preston has just been super heady. And the most surprising one in the defensive end room is Kingsley is healthy after we all thought he might miss the whole season because it was reported to us he blew his ACL out.
He said it.
Yeah, and then he was basically crying in the locker room and that's not to bash it. Like I would too if I thought, oh shit, I just blew my knee out. And then, oh, just kidding, I didn't. Like it's like the collective like head scratch from the Packers fandom when they open training camp and it's like 55 is out there and it's like what? And it's like did they give the double number to someone else kind of thing? But you get that edge room and then these D linemen who you talk about 3-4 versus 4-3. Only Kenny and TJ really fit the quote unquote traditional build as a 3-4 defensive lineman. But now all these guys are playing a 4-3 defensive tackle position. And I'm excited to see what Devontae is able to do, what Carl Brooks is able to do. We've heard good things about Wooden being a different player because he's bulked up to like the low 290s. And just seeing what you're going to be able to get. And then, TJ is taking a page out of Gilbert Brown's book and is just gonna, he's going from a true two gapper to seeing if he can get his momentum going upfield. So I'm just excited to see what this unit does when they don't have really what sounds like restrictions on how they're supposed to play, what they're allowed to and not to do. And it's just see ball, get ball at this point. So really excited to see what that front down forward looks like. And it sounds like as much as Hafley is revamping the back end of the defense, it sounds like that front four is going to be counted on. And I do think has the talent to cover up a lot of holes and learning hiccups for the back seven of the defense as the season moves through the first month, the first half, and Hafley gets his system on traction. So that's what I'm excited to see as they get out of the gate is how does that front four get off the ball?
Yeah. I'm excited to see, like you kind of piggybacking off what you said, Mike, but like Rashawn Gary, all of his offseason workouts, he's coming off the ball in the defensive end position. Are they going to revert him back to what he was at Michigan, where he was All-American? Or, I mean, he was God back then. He was awesome. If the Packers can get him to play in that position and command that attention from the opposing offensive line, and then the whole other side of the line, if this gets blown up by our defense, it's going to be a scary defense.
I think the only difference is they won't move him into the interior portion of the line. I think
this on the edge,
Yeah. Well, you said revert him back to his Michigan. Well, at Michigan, they had him playing up and down.
Yeah. But I mean,
they had him play up and down the line, and I don't see now. I've said this all of last year, and I think we can finally get it this year, where we have Van Ness and Gary lined up on the same side, rushing the quarterback.
Oh, come on, Caleb Williams, let's go.
Yeah.
Can't wait. Cannot wait.
Because I think Lucas is, with the way Lucas is built, I think he can go back to because Iowa did the same thing with him as Michigan did with Rashawn. They played him up and down the defensive line. I think the big difference is I think Lucas is built different than Rashawn, where he can still manage to play the interior and the edge portion, where I think you're really just going to want to stay with edge for Rashawn. Not saying there's anything wrong with that or Lucas is better than Rashawn. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying the way that they're built, it's a little bit different, and I
their
think
play style to it does. Rashawn can get a little lost in trying to be more of like a speed specialist, whereas Lucas he does a better job of staying on task and taking the shortest line to the ball. So yeah, I do think that is the bigger differentiator between the two of them.
All right, so I suppose that means it's my turn again.
Yeah.
What haven't we talked about that I could? I'm going to say this one, and the only reason I'm going to say this one is just because it's kind of interesting how this all went about. And I guess you can mix it in with just completely special teams, but the long snappers, because, Mike and I talked about this a lot last year where not all of Anders's problems were him. A lot of it had to do with Orslick snaps. And Whelan did a hell of a job to be able to wrangle some of those snaps to at least get them on the ground for Anders to be able to attempt a kick. So we all thought that coming into this season, they signed that Bowden out of Wisconsin for a pretty sizable signing bonus. And then the first thing that, one of the first moves that they do is they cut him before training camp.
But he is back.
He's back.
But they brought him, I know, but they brought him back. So, here we think we're going to have this huge ass competition. Then we go back to, okay, well, Orslick is the only one. Now we're back to, okay, we're going to have a huge ass competition. So I know it's weird to say that you're going to be interested in seeing snappers, but like I said, Mike and I talked about this a lot last year where we focused in on the long snapping because we were seeing that not all of Anders's problems had to do with him and his kicking ability.
Yeah, it's got to get consistency,
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Brian. I think this fact that Joe went to long snapper shows we are scraping the bottom of the barrel. So, Brian, your last pick, bring us home. Last thing, well, not the last, but last big thing that you're looking forward to in preseason.
Who's going to be returning kicks and punts with the new rule? Because last night I saw a lot of Jaden Reed. And then you hear from training camp, initially we got Keyshawn Nixon for that role to be the returner, but he's stepping up on defense in practice. So you're going to keep him off returns. Who are you going to have bringing that ball up? And if Jaden Reed's your number 3 receiver, do you want him bringing that up? Or you want to, like you mentioned earlier, keep a receiver on the roster designated with speed? Could be DeBose because he has speed, right?
Decent, yeah.
What are they going to do with the new kickoff rules, and are they going to try to save Jaden Reed and Keyshawn Nixon to play offense and defense? I'm just curious to see what happens with this new rule, I guess.
Go for it, Joe.
I was just going to say, I think it's going to be a primarily Keyshawn Nixon thing. But it doesn't hurt to have one or two others taking the majority of the snaps during the preseason because that's in case this happens.
Yeah.
So, let's say Nixon, knock on wood that this doesn't happen, but, Nixon is out for 3 weeks because of some kind of ticky-tacky injury. Well, there goes your whole special, return game because you didn't let anybody else take the snaps during the preseason.
Correct.
So, it's best that, okay, we know this is our guy. He's going to be doing this, but we're going to let him concentrate on this other stuff while we let, Reed or DeBose or I think there's been a couple other guys that have been taking kickoff and punt return snaps. So that makes sense, but I get what you're saying. Do you just leave Nixon out there, or if he's playing too good, do you pull him and put Reed out there? I don't know, but I think it's just a good thing for all of the preseason stuff to just throw as many guys out there as you can to take snaps in case something happens.
I agree with Joe. I do think Reed is going to be your primary punt returner. Nixon is going to be your primary kick returner, but it behooves you to have as many trusted options on your roster. And because one, like Joe said, Reed did miss time last year with injury. Nixon has been pretty healthy, but has had some nagging things. You don't want one of those guys to go down and then like the first time you walk someone out there, it's like they've never returned a punt in their NFL career kind of thing. And it's like, you just, that's when every fan, your gut just drops out the bottom of your body and you're like, oh God.
That's when you get the Amari Rogerses and the Darius Shepherds and
don't fair catch it. Just don't even go. Just call everyone off and let the thing bounce for 20 times and stuff and just let it go.
I get that you want to have, obviously,
yeah.
You want to have dependable people back there, but I'm just saying, like, if Nixon and Reed are, a valuable part of the offense and defense, you want them back there. I mean, I can see it as a game. They get paid money to go out there and do that. But obviously, you want to have more people in line in case something does happen.
I do think the depth in the receiver room helps make it. What's the best word? Makes it more like, makes it more acceptable, I guess, that Reed is. You're like, is he your wide receiver one? Somewhere between your wide receiver 1, wide receiver 3. In terms of how important he is to your offense. But because you have Watson plays slot with speed, Melton emerged as another deep slot, deep play slot guy. So they're not Reed, but they bring elements of what he does so that you're like, if something happens to him, you're still good on offense kind of thing and stuff. And kind of the same in the DB room where, Nixon, he's probably going to be the primary slot defender to start the season, but you drafted like 3 safeties who can cover the slot. You've got Carrington who can cover the slot. You've got, you drafted Kalen King this year who, he's not a near guarantee to make the roster, but he can play the slot. So you've got overlap in those 2 rooms where you're like, okay, yeah, like you're a little more, and that's the thing is like the rules are so different. You can't just kill shot guys like you used to be able to. So even more so, you're like, we're okay letting important guys play return positions because you don't just have the like guys getting speared from 20 yards away kind of thing and stuff like that anymore. So I think it makes it more, more digestible to see a quote unquote star option out there and all. So yeah, but I do think to Joe's point, we'll probably see those 2 guys return like maybe 2 to 3 of each of their, punt and kicks. And then the rest of it is just going to be guys trying to either expand their spot on the roster or guys trying to like cling to a roster spot, like, who's a low wide receiver, the kid from Albany. Like, does it turn out that Julian Hicks is a good punt returner or something like that? And, is that a skill that you're like, oh, we might keep that guy around just because, is he Desmond Howard his way onto the roster kind of thing, to call back to 96. So it'll be really interesting. And like I said, I don't think we're going to understand the full ramifications of these new kickoff rules until we see them enacted a few times over the course of the season. So
nobody's going to know anything until they get into, I didn't watch the Hall of Fame game, so I don't know how well it was going during it.
There's going to be a point at like Thanksgiving where it's like, wait, that's allowable. It's like, oh yeah, that's those new rules that no one has needed to or taken advantage of to this point. So everyone's just like what the hell just happened? What am I watching, football or rugby on my screen right now? So yeah,
just go for the onside kick.
I know. R.I.P. surprise onside kicks. You lived a good life. But that's going to wrap it up for us tonight. Brian, thank you so much for joining us. I know that Joe and I have raised more questions than not for you. Oh, this is who I signed on to podcast under. This is how they run it on the Big Boys show. But no, it's there is usually more structure once we get into the games. As I said, we are dragging this show across the finish line as we wait for preseason games to start up. But Brian, thanks so much for joining us. Everyone, please check out the CheezeTalk pod. You can find that on the OPE Network. Check out the website, ohanapackers.org. Brian show streams of Brian shows, Joe and my show. they're all up there. We've got our writers are putting up more blog posts as we circle into the start of preseason games. Expect the volume to increase. The quality will not drop off there. We've got some excellent writers on tab right now. Follow.
Speaking of, make sure you follow Cole. It's what is it? It's CRIXUS. I'm completely blanking on his Twitter. CRIXUS 1170. We're trying to get him to at least 100 followers. We were just talking this before the show that most of his followers right now are just those crappy spam bots. So we're trying to get him built up. Once he does hit 100 followers, we are going to give away a T-shirt from our merch store to one lucky person. A T-shirt of their choice. So please do go follow him. We hit our 523 mark. We did give away the 8x10 of Jair Alexander. That was to, again, I'm blanking on names because, again, I'm not great at names. I forget my name half the time.
You know what Iowa stands for, right?
I don't know. And that's basically what it stands for. I don't know.
Idiots out wandering around.
There you go. Ryan Graham. Ryan Graham was the winner of the 8x10. He did get a hold of us. We are going to get that sent out here within the next couple of days. So congrats to him. I'm sure we've got other giveaways coming up, depending on what happens with me taking my trip up to Wisconsin and all that stuff here towards the end of the month. So please follow Cole.
Brian. Oh, yeah.
Follow Brian. Follow Carlos. Follow us all. And, make sure if you want in on the giveaways to pay attention to the Ohana account, which Mike will now give you the handle.
Yep. So follow Ohana_Packers to be eligible for the drawings like this Jair one that we just gave away. Follow Brian at CheezeTalk. That's cheese with a Z, talk_pod. Follow him on TikTok, Brian_Rago, RAGO. You can follow him on YouTube at CheezeTalkPod. Excuse me. Follow the podcast, both podcasts, on all your favorite podcasting apps. Give us likes and subscribes. For this one, for OPE, give us your positive and negative feedback. We want to be creating the content you're looking for. As with Joe and I, we've fought through. We've given you top fives of everything from food to music to movies to the labels on our T-shirts. we have fought through the
guests that we had.
We fought through the doldrums of the off season, and we are on the doorstep of the preseason. 2024-2025 season is right around the corner. Keep it tuned in here to OPE. Go Pack Go, and Aloha.